Okay, so welcome to the second panel of our painting symposium. There's actually a chair up here, and I'm the guilty one on the end, so there's an empty seat here. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Ondre. Thanks, Nicole.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Nicole Ondre. I'm an artist based here in Vancouver, and I studied at Emily Carr and lived here for a long time, and then I've been living in Germany the last few years and have just come back to Vancouver. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to kind of re-enter and reacquaint myself with the painting dialogue in the city. So thank you to Alison for inviting me to be part of this panel. This panel was put together and planned by Alison Clay, and then I was invited as a moderator. So we have Francine Savard, Charlene Vickers, and Christine Major. Is that okay? Charlene and I both live here in Vancouver, and Christine and Francine live in Montreal, so there's already kind of a Quebec-Vancouver exchange set up in just different ways of thinking about painting. We've been brought together under the rubric of making a difference, the effective capacity of painting. So as Alison has formulated it, this panel considers the question of painting as a matter of not just its materiality, but also of how it exceeds its thingness to create significance within the context it is placed. The artist cannot merely be a painter, but is part of an interrelated chain of efficaciousness. What considerations confront the painter beyond the demands of the surface? That's better. So these are big questions, and to me, the idea of making a difference, or that phrase, it kind of conjures up this kind of a slogan or a way of abstractly referring to a type of social change, and it also has a very positive ring to it. But when I started to think more about what that could mean, I started to think what kind of difference and what kind for whom, and how would you measure such a thing as effectiveness of a painting in any context? Is it related to a kind of audience response or a kind of unquantifiable after effect, or this chain that is brought up? Is it if it creates a controversy or garners a lot of critical attention, is judged by history over time? So these are just kind of different kind of first associations that came up for me when thinking about this panel. But then there's also kind of another way of interpreting this, which is making a difference, and as painters, as makers of objects, the object itself could stand for a kind of difference that circulates within the art system, difference from a kind of image homogeneity or a dominant structure or model of thought. So we'll be approaching this by looking at the practices of these three artists and considering the terms of their practices and how that then transfers into the work and the life of the work itself. So I'm just going to read the summaries of these talks to kind of give it a basic framework to what's going to be spoken about. Charlene will start with a talk called 1,000 Shades of Green in the City of the Body. Color is a life force and a source of motivation and urgency. Bold color contrasts refer to the natural world where there is not one universal astroturf green, but more like 1,000 shades of green in the woods. When I explore color, I am influenced by music and my movements through city streets, beyond which I rarely venture. So perhaps my vision of the natural world is utopic and imaginary. How color and painting influence my perception of the world is that it opens things up to possibility, endless variety, inspiration, and non-homogeneity. This space of painting expresses and defines new spaces, new visions of self, presence, identity, and territorial embodiment. This territory of the body carries home in each step, each gesture, and each action of painting creating I put forth in the world. And the phrase 1,000 shades of green in the woods is from a song called Blake by C. McQuarrie? Okay. I'm also going to refrain from just reading the artist bios because you have them in your program. So this is, this will serve as an introduction. Should I introduce as we go or do them all now? Do them all now? Okay.
We'll be done with.
Yeah.
Then we can do.
Next we'll hear from Christine. And her presentation is titled, How Can Feminist Values Expressed Through a Painting Installation Move Matter? And she'll be addressing the exhibition project Le Fer du 3915.
Bravo.
Oh.
The 3915 St. Catherine Street case. In
Okay.
English. Yeah,
Okay.
Sounds more serious.
Okay. Which took root in a disused building waiting for renovation to become social housing for young people. She was invited by the organization Le Avenue to occupy the premises in order to create a site-specific exhibition based on an open, non-hierarchical exchange among students, teachers, and young adults. After months of experimental and feminist creations, an in situ interdisciplinary exhibition emerged. The exhibition was intended to be a testimony of unstable identities and realities. How does the context of creation influence the practice of art and its teaching? What is the impact on feminist discourses of an immersion in a disadvantaged milieu? How to promote difference, a contrario to the dominant thinking in art? What are the impacts of disadvantaged immersion on feminist discourses? So, quite a few questions to address. And then we'll hear from Francine, whose presentation is entitled When the Situation Asks for It. Savard writes, I cannot skip the subject of abstraction and some kind of social relevance today. She describes her work as pictorial propositions assisted by models of abstraction and conceptual tools. She will speak about the kinds of subterfuge she uses to avoid reducing her work to a discussion about abstraction, an overdetermined category, speaking about tableau 2D, tableau 3D, when the situation asks for it, tableau figure, when a direct reference to the material world can be read, tableau surface or tableau object, etc. She will address her employment of conceptual tactics, how these bring to her work a sensuousness, quote, that draws simultaneously on all our senses. And that's from Eva Lembois.
Not from me.
Okay. And that threatens to undermine the traces in her work of early modern utopian optimism. Okay. So without further ado, Charlene Vickers.
Is that my file? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, and thanks for coming. I hope everyone is well today. I have some thoughts and feelings that I've written down, so I'm going to read that, And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some work I had in the Vancouver Special Ambivalent Pleasures show at the Vancouver Art Gallery last winter and spring. A thousand shades of green in the woods is my utopic thinking of the natural world. I began to question, how do I see green in my urban landscape? How do I see green? Green light says go. Green bills buy items for sale. Green bins hold organics, refuse. A plastic green plant in the foyer. AstroTurf grass in front of a condo complex. Its texture mimics and makes me laugh a bit. How can its artificiality be so deceiving? It looks so real. And the anticipation of developers to think the grass will inevitably be trampled in the downtown corridor of Seymour Street. I started thinking about AstroTurf green and its plastic nature, its artificial, bright, and durable way. And then I also began to think where they use that. Well, the Astro Dome in Houston, where they originally renamed it. And I began to think about playing fields and stadiums and spaces of competition. In looking at AstroTurf, there's a universal understanding of looking, a cultural agreement that we make, that indeed, that AstroTurf there is meant to look like and indicate grass. If I were to extend that idea in terms of how to look at a painting, there are also values in terms of cultural understanding that we share. This indicates representation, abstraction, a landscape, gestural expression, or this is minimalism. So what I'm interested in thinking about my own work is in finding things that are real and not plastic and not reimaginings of things. What I'm seeking are 1,000 shades of multiplicity, 1,000 different ways of producing a feeling through gesture and color. Within its fluidity, it is not a fake conversation within abstraction or within modernism. It exists somewhere on the margins and outskirts of representation. Painting for me is an action, a translation of something that has its own life. The line or the stripe are infused with a breath and are an index of my body's gesture and existence. I would extend this to be indicative of my body as a kind of survival, my art, a cultural survival. I exist in the city and I walk through downtown Vancouver every day, from the West End over to Chinatown to my studio. As I move forward and make steps, I'm existing in an act of embodied territory. My body is an extension of my territorial lands, of the Lake of the Woods, Wasatch Onagam Anishinaabe of northwestern Ontario. This is my body. This is my identity. This is my power. This was not always so. It was something that had to be unearthed. This foundation of territory I held within myself, and it was hidden from me by colonial assimilation, non-native adoption, stereotypes, and racism. Initially, when I started out in painting in art college in 1990, how my body was read by the institution influenced the way my work was read. And that, at the time, seemed absurd to me. Why would my use of red indicate my heritage or my race? How would I communicate or engage or learn anything when the eyes within power were colonial ones? That gaze was a hard thing to dodge. So what I did was I found a way to look back. Sometimes my paintings allowed me to return the gaze, and working and walking and living within my own power, the birth territory I carry in my body where paintings are envisioned. And this is where I express my personal sovereignty. When I make a vertical line or a zigzag, it sets up a place of negotiation. This is my gesture. It is minimal, and it does not tell you a story of my Indian experience. These are my colors, and color, that's what excites me. A studio practice that brings me joy. It's my fortress of solitude. For my art practice that includes sculpture, installation, and performance, it is painting that centers and balances me. My attempts to make 1,000 shades of green is what energizes me, and it is that energy that I infuse in my work. That energy has the capacity to ignite memory and feeling, and painting sharpens my senses and engages my brain, heart, and spirit, and my body. For me, painting is my own kind of spirituality. I find that when I go to my studio and look at my appearance and then leave my studio after a good session in the studio of painting or whatever I'm doing, I always find that there's an actual physical change in my appearance. There's a change in the way my eyes look. A 1,000 shades of green are words of what is possible, of what can be done, something that's waiting to be executed, waiting to be voiced, waiting to be thought of and felt. I sometimes think that the zigzag is a cultural gesture. And this gesture is an echoing of a kind of activity of quilling that I've learned in terms of like using a porcupine quill to embroider on top of hide. So there's this way of thinking about the natural world in terms of it, something like a porcupine quill, in terms of it being a form of protection for a small animal. So I was thinking about this idea and thinking about how to echo that sort of idea, but also echo the act of quilling within a painted work. And sort of connecting that to another work that I had been engaged with, which was making some large cedar spears that are meant to be like 10-foot tall quills. Where are we? Sorry. Where am I? Oh, here we are. There we are. So, so in thinking about the quill and sort of echoing what traditional quill work might be in a painting, I kind of see these paintings that I would have at the VAG, which were here, which were there, as a form of protection and also a form of like igniting your spirit, and also as a way of indicating the gesture as an index of survival and vitality. and also the quill as being a method to create composition as well. So. And so that they were becoming a little bit more translating. They were originally like watercolor, gouache, and pencil crayon, and small scale on paper. So now they're sort of becoming a little bit bigger in terms of the scale, and also the medium's changing a bit. It's here's this particular one is oil on panel. So there is like a lot of repetition in what I do, and there's also that sort of process of repetition is important for thinking about, I don't know, memory within yourself, and memory and connecting your activity with something that has been engaged with by my ancestors in terms of the quill work, and having that sort of physical, tangible connection in your hands, and then translating that into something new. So that's what a lot of that work is all about, and bringing a lot of different elements and a lot of different energies and a lot of different days and moments into one big work, which is right here in this slide. And that's all I have to say about that. So thank you, and miigwech. Thanks, Lee.
Christine Major is up next.
Very pleased to be here. I actually, thank you very much, Alison, for having me here today. I worked on an underground project, and now I'm in front of a microphone talking about this project. So it's kind of bizarre for me to be talking about this event that took place last summer in a poor neighborhood of Montreal. So I'll be showing images of that in a sec. But I just wanted to make two little notes before I start. I don't know if Isabelle Gras is still in the room, but I was really interested in her book in German. On women in the visual arts. But of course, it would be nice if it was translated in French first, or in English. It would be wonderful, really. Because Google Translator doesn't work for that text at all. It can't comprehend at all. Also, I just wanted to say a few things about Montreal and the program, the visual arts program where I teach. I try to teach painting in the expanded field. I will caricature here a bit my department, because we're very different from Concordia, which is more like Beaux-Arts oriented. But at l'UQAM, we are like thinking of looking at the undergrad program, for example. So we've been talking about post-studio practice. That's what I'm going through right now. So it's kind of a crisis. But I'm 50 also, so that's another thing. That's another story. But it does inform the project I'll be speaking about. So we're like, some of my colleagues are against aesthetics, against producing objects altogether. They're into language. Language is a very fast-paced way to exchange knowledge. So it is a challenge for me to be still working with my brush, thinking with my brush. But I do respect that form of courage that it takes to be in the studio and working with the brush. But I have to address the context at l'UQAM. So painting or studio-based research is judged, I'm exaggerating for the sake of this, non-scientific, especially when I'm doing grant proposal. I feel that. It's non-scientific, of course, too feminine. In the higher education context, it's too feminine thinking through painting, thinking with painting is too feminine. It's irrational primitive, in a way, for certain colleagues in that frame of mind. So I don't know if this sounds like a familiar rhetoric for you, but I just decided after this project to, instead of resisting these definitions, and after reading The Queer Art of Failure, I just decided to embrace these labels, let's say, in order to make a difference in my job at l'UQAM, in the academic institution, and also trying to find ways to circulate outside the frame. Because I'm a painter, so there's no mistake about that. But I've been examining, experimenting a site-specific project last summer, and I'll give you a few details about how I went about venturing outside the academic institution. And I dragged actually students from the undergrad program, eventually from the master program, and at the end we had also students from the doctorate program. So we all ended up in Hochelaga Maisonneuve doing this site-specific project. So we've been thinking in that context to escape the logic of the economy, because it was the Avenue is like it's a non-profit organization working with young adults that were homeless. The student I'm co-directing at the doctorate level is working in art intervention, and she had access to this three-level story building in Hochelaga Maisonneuve, which is the poorest neighborhood in Canada. It's a French community there. Actually, fentanyl, the drug, just was also introduced in that neighborhood. So it's a very hard neighborhood. So we had access to this building because of l'Avenue. And my student in art intervention had access to the three-story building. And I started venturing out towards the east end of Montreal, visiting her in her studio. So that's how the project came about in a way. So we started thinking of escaping from l'UQAM, from escaping in a war zone in Hochelaga Maisonneuve. And I was struggling with this idea of, Buren and the function of the studio. This interrelationship between museums and studio. Buren talks about the fact that museums and studios, it's this flip two sides of the same coin, les deux jambages de la même édifice. So it means that in a way, I was choking in the showing my work in museums, showing my work in artist-run centers, showing my work in different venues, and having to deal with, Madame Gros was talking about that yesterday. The fact, everything that is involved in painting, all of the suppléments around painting, meaning the hegemony of language, that we always have to justify our art, the hierarchy involved in the art market, also this idea of the logic of success, all of this pressure on the artistic practice. I was just trying to run away from that. So we started reading Virginia Woolf and her book about, how is it called? A Room of One's Own, but also the other one, Three Guineas. She had interesting things to say about patriarchal society, the relationship of artists to money, to create the conditions to produce work. She talked about performance, profit, and competition, everything we hear about this logic of the economy in a capitalist, paternalist world. So she had an interesting thing to say to artists. Why don't you just leave that? Go outside, be an outsider. You know, you don't necessarily have to deal with that logic. You can function outside of the logic of the economy. So she said, try to occupy the position of the outsider. So of course, escaping from UQAM, visiting my student that is involved with art intervention, well, we just started to think, okay, well, we'll do a residency in this building. And that's how it started. So I was outside the art milieu, outside the academic institution, and it just revealed to me that painting for me is about playing with knowledge in an experimental and creative way, but it is always partial, local, and historical. And of course, economy does shape the practice. So I'll just go over there and show you some of the images. Will the screen come on? Here.
This one, right?
Yeah. Actually, I will be showing an empty space because it's not about necessarily showing the students' work at this point. I just want you to see the building. I'm publishing an article in French about the project. I'll be showing a bit of the work, but there's copyright issues involved in this. But at least you'll get a sense of where it was, how it looked like then. I have a lot of regrets about this project, but again, I said it was fine that there was a lot of failure involved in this project, and it's fine. We actually tried to structure like a table ronde, you know, a formal exchange, trying to find a way to speak about the project. We invited Thérèse Saint-Gelais, who's an art historian. So, and we discovered really interesting things, like, for example, Myriam Shapiro in the 70s did a very similar project called Women's House. So it informed the work intellectually. It was very stimulating, but it was still like trying to confine our experiment, you know, trying to rationalize the work. And it took away a bit from the pleasure we had to just be free a bit from all these exterior pressures. There was one thing that I really discovered over there also. I said I was away from the hegemony of language, hierarchies at the university level, but also breaking down the barriers between doctorate and master program and undergrad program, this logic of success. But there was also a question of artistic automatisms, you know? I have like as a teacher, as an artist, as a feminist, it was all very separate for me. Like I was living sometimes a form of stereotype related to all these different positions or hats that I'm wearing. When I felt that there was a breakdown of that hermetism between these different roles we play in society, right? So I let go of a lot of automatism through this venturing outside the frame, the field of the logic of the frame. And it's something very close to my preoccupation as a painter. So beyond the band of the surface, beyond the logic of the frame, there is a form of freedom to experiment and to run away from artistic automatism. And also this obsession, like I said, the hegemony of language, this obsession with being understood. Like we didn't care. Nobody came anyway. Actually, I invited my collectors to come, but nobody showed up. So, and it's a milieu that's being gentrified, right? Gentrified. So we had heavy security the night of the opening. I wasn't sure if we were perceived as enemy or friends, you know? Because this building used to be, there was actually a documentary on the building. It was a haut lieu of drug abuse. So when we opened the door on St. Catherine Street, sometimes drug addicts would just come in. They would know the space very well, you know. So they didn't know what we were doing there. We were actually experiencing some vandalism in the neighborhood because, again, there's a tension between poor people and then this process of gentrification. So it was an uncomfortable place to work in. So I co-curated an exhibition with the master and doctorate students with Claude Majot, who is this student in art intervention. And we invited, for example, Valérie Perron to do a performance in the storefront. So she was used to doing performances, for example, in institutional context, but now she was in Hochelaga Maisonneuve with people that are not necessarily familiar with art. People reacted in unpredictable way, right? It was a different public. So that's where I became interested in this notion of shadow feminism, negative feminism, going against the grain in a way. I actually found a word to describe what we were doing because we did meetings together and we were trying to put words on this because we're drilled to explain and to name things. So I named this project Site-Specific Artistic Experiment in Slacker Feminism. At the same time, when we did the project, there was an attack of students on the Université de Laval campus. So you've seen this woman just locked up in her apartment at Laval, reading Un lieu à soi. So it was like there was all sorts of things happening in the media. So it informed the actual project. So what I did is that I started doing part of the work I do in the studio in this space. So it was on the ground level. So I constructed this structure because I wanted to do photo shoots with the actual young adults from L'Avenue. So we did a few evenings of improvisation in front of the camera. So I took pictures of them and we sort of constructed a vocabulary playing around in that space. And it became more and more related to gore imagery because they were, I don't know, Halloween seems to be a fun thing. So, and it was a bizarre building, you know. It was like humid, smelly, like there was wires, not wires, but stuff hanging around, and it was a dangerous space. We had to clean up and stuff. So I played around with them when we did improv in front of the camera. So I'm working from this source material now that I gathered on site while working with the people from L'Avenue. Of course, bringing my students to the third floor, because we had like ground level interventions. We had stuff on the first and the second floor. My students, undergrad, saw artists from the doctorate working. So we started talking together about what we were doing. So it was a way to be completely outside hierarchy, you know. We were all planning eventually to open the exhibition and show the work. And there was lots of discussion, not about art milieu obsessions, but more about real stuff, you know, well, real. Another reality, you know, an oblique way to look at what we're doing in the art milieu. Like there was prostitutes, like should I invite prostitutes to come to do a photo shoot? Because I was doing, this was in the context of a class called the figurative painting, okay? So there was a lot of discussions around the representation of the human body. So of course, seeing all sorts of people around this building, students became aware of other issues, political, social, economical issues that impact the practice of painting, of art. So it was extremely fun for me to just install the work, change things around, integrate process into and interact differently with the public. And say, for example, did it make a difference for us to be there? It's like, did we produce effects in this context? I would say that it had a huge impact on us, you know, coming there and saying, playing around this idea of creating a room of one's own, etc. It was just like a destabilizing experience altogether. But to this day, we did interviews with the young adults from the Avenue. I'm not sure how they read the actual presence of the artist in this context. But it certainly was very rich for us to try to open up to other realities and to integrate social preoccupations in our work. So, yeah, did I go through all the images?
I think so. Is that the?
So there was two things, like there was an installation which you're seeing the inside part. Like when you came in the exhibition, it was like, you couldn't see, you had to look through holes, you know, but for spectacular reasons, I'm just showing these images. But when you came in, you wouldn't see the inside. Some people would just open up the drapes and go inside and see this sort of fiction. Was it really, like, was there a dead body, or is it just a crime scene for real, or is it fake, etc.? So people would look through the holes, etc. So I played around with this first part, which was more like, for me, painting in the expanded field. It was like an open-ended installation that was like being modified throughout the exhibition. I did photo shoots with some of the adults from L'Avenue, and like, I don't know how, I didn't ask for specific things, but we sort of built this improvisation in front of the camera. I did have my intention to do a certain amount of work, like, for example, Danse Macabre, which you'll be seeing in a sec, based on this improv. So it was like, are you seeing it? Oh, it's coming. So I had like a certain goals, you know, paintings that I had pre-planned. I was already working on prior to this experience on site. So this is based, like the painting is based on the improv we did, but that one I really, you know, asked for certain things from the adults from the Avenue. And I also had a few images about, for example, Carrie, the film. Remember the film? An humiliating experience of this young adolescent. So I did like drop tons of blood and work with this imagery around the movie of Carrie. So I played around with my paintings, you know, inside the frame with the logic I'm used to, but I also experimented with the space. And there was a back and forth between the props that were around, like an old toilet bowl, and so we did all this play around Duchamp. So we had fun. Every week when we came in was a new adventure, because it was unpredictable. We had, like, for example, prostitutes the night of the vernissage who would go, wow, it would take me like a year, you know, to pay for this painting. There wasn't any prices or any titles available anywhere, but there was these discussions, and we saw the perception of contemporary art through other, you know, and a completely different set of preoccupations. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you. And now we have Francine, ça va?
Yes. Okay. I was planning to read it here with the images in loop, but I think I will go there and push the button.
Okay.
Let me know if you need. English is very difficult for me, so I decided to write text and read it to you. Okay. I have to push this. Okay. 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 Thank you for inviting me. The image you are about to see come mostly from my 2009-2010 survey exhibition held at the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, curated by Leslie Johnstone. I will come to the subject of this choice at point 6 of the following overview of my practice. On the way, I will talk more in length of some of the works. I made this choice amongst even later projects because this particular reunion of works in a singular venue materializes at its best the way I think about my artwork and about how I conceive of a relationship with an audience. Point 1. Many may argue that pictorial practice practice is embedded in a Quebec art history in line from the plasticiens of the second period, which emerged in the 60s and the 70s. But I do hope I had curved this line, contaminating their formalist aesthetic with narratives. Point 2. For my part, I prefer to describe my work as pictorial propositions assisted by models of abstraction and conceptual tools. These propositions set between abstraction and figuration, between painting, sculpture, and installation, between visual arts and literature, explore, among other things, the conventions of painting and the discourses surrounding it. I think it's in loop without me touching the button. Point 3. It is under the aegis of synthetic devices and bent to a set of rules specifically created for the project that the translation adaptation of a sum of data into pictorial propositions takes place. Devices such as the creation of a lexicon or the synthetic analysis of a text, or the collecting, sorting, encoding, or any statistical measuring, for example. These data are used to establish a number of components, shape, scale, pattern, colors, etc., in order to end up with a painting that I call an operative structure. The appropriation of these methods that are usually related to the visualization of data with end results like map, charts, diagrams, aims at releasing any representation from a strictly figurative state in order to open an abstract object to the real. As it becomes inappropriate to describe this type of painting in terms of abstraction or figuration, I will call the result, according to the project, a tableau surface, or most often a tableau object, nothing new here since Manet, a tableau 2D or a tableau 3D, a tableau figure or else. As you can see, I prefer using the word tableau instead of painting. I appreciate the polysemy of tableau. It can also refer to a diagram, a list, the reunion of facts, events, scenes, theater, etc. I sometimes use the word in the title of the artwork so as to already inject a dose of multiple readings into the work. In fact, I will take great care into titling the work in order for this threesome, the object itself, its form, its size, what is on the object, colors, brush marks, or no brush marks, text, if it is the case, and title, to offer many channels that will be at play for reading this combination. Point 6. This point takes into consideration the exhibition of the works, that is to say, the moment where the work comes into completion, where the layout of the exhibition, its scenography, will favor the upsurge of field of thoughts that are magnetic between them. As I see it, the foundation of my works is a combination of internal imperatives and a posture in an exhibition. This specific exhibition at the MAC is a field of crisscross paths that brings to the open parallels between works with new potential for analysis, all in all, allowing new narratives. At the beginning of the exhibition, the only work positioned chronologically is the 2009 remake of a 1992 red monochrome with the inscription of the words "Il y avait un drap blanc." There was a white sheet, titled 4,104 inches square of red. The first painting had been done in an urgency on a large, already existing full of marks canvas, with the first spot of red paint that I had within reach. However, in order to satisfy my demands for this exhibition, it had to be perfectly done, without any of the marks that filled the first one. It had to play at the level of an idea, not on my personal history of paint handling or on any authorship's marks. The painted text and the red surface form an amalgam that constitutes a sort of cinematographic screen which trigger the imagination while speaking of the painting process and its tangible reality. I call it my first painting because in 1992 it points out a new direction for me. It is also the only painting with the words of my own, if such a thing can be said, and maybe the only one where the color has a metaphorical or symbolical edge. This flat surface is faced with the rolled canvas with its dripping stopped in midair, which is deposited on what could be its base or its crate. Both works are accompanied on the adjacent wall by Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, a green video that presents a text I wrote, which describes the family photo of a summer picnic and from which comes the quote, "Il y avait un drap blanc." In this video, while a zoom motion makes the text more and more readable, the letters decompose themselves in an electronic green field. Only some fragments of the text appear for a few seconds, words like "on voit," we see, and words of colors in connection with food like olive, orange, eggshells, Bourgogne, etc. I wanted those words and the confrontation between surface and object to resonate all along into the circuit of the exhibition. For example, while in front of the 5 paintings of the larger series, Un plein, un vide, each being the reunion of a color, a word, and a form. The colors of the surfaces are only mentioned in the titles: a yellow field, a blue surface, orange panel, a green coastline, a pink spot. The words tattooed in the center of the surface, un passage, une aire, un pan, un littoral, une tache, came from commentary texts about Fernand Leduc's painting of the 50s. The forms themselves are extraction I made from the original rectangular sites of Leduc's painting. All in all, the paintings are displayed somehow as artifacts, as a mimicry of archaeological and taxonomical processes. They are accompanied by a book that displays the complete list of words found in that context. Further away, the words on the green video may also, again, be taken into account while in front of Les couleurs de Cézanne dans les mots de Rilke, a colliding of painting and language which situates the experience between the perceptual and the conceptual. Not far from the column, a fictional book acts as a label. As mentioned on the cover, I put myself in the skin of the author as the essayist who meets its object while juxtaposing different paradigms of readability. At the end of the circuit, those precedent propositions may still make sense in front of Tu aimes un dernier tableau, an ensemble quoting Marcel Duchamp's last painting, Tu aimes, where a color chart organized into a diagrammatic abstract motif serves, as Thierry de Duve puts forward in his essay Nominalisme pictural, serves to establish a vocabulary for naming the colors. The color spectrum, he writes, is continuous. It is the language that cuts it. I was hoping that the same kind of web could be staged with n equal 32%, the large blue deep painting, which finds itself closely surrounded not only with additional paintings of the series, but also by the large white painting titled De la peinture and the 399 small elements of La Pharmacie de Platon, both listing library call numbers and which titles are borrowed respectively from the writings of Alberti and Derrida. N equal 32% also faces the polyptych of 5 polygonal shapes of cardboard-like open boxes titled with Walter Benjamin, Je déballe ma bibliothèque. In fact, the entire exhibition is constructed around my fascination and question with language and knowledge, painting and their mutual relations. I would add, if I may say, more about N equal 32%, that the project is based on a commentary text of French art historians Jacqueline Lichtenstein and Jean-Pierre Groulier, a 5,000-word text on the work of French painter François Morellet titled Morellet ou les pouvoirs du neutre. While the initial impulse was already sparked by the title, it reminded me of Roland Barthes' Séminaire de Neutral. It is really the first paragraph of the essay that convinced me of the relevance of this research, specifically the last sentence that introduces the topic of the text that reads something like this: it is a question of testing the mode of discourse traditionally used to refer to a work like this. Being in nature suspicious with the words, I decided, following that reading, to classify every word of the text in 7 grammatical categories, plus 1 which takes care of the name of the artist and the titles of his artworks. From the compilation of each list, I deduced the size and the exact broken edge text motif of each painting. The series conveys from this defragmented text the abstract idea of a complete 100 work, 32% of nouns, which is the greater part, 19% of epithet, 12 of verbs, etc. I came into this model of defragmentation while looking at the action of a software that I used at that time to clean and put in order the hard disk of my computer. This particular software, which nobody uses anymore, recognized each type of document and assorts all documents of the same type. This operation was carried out with an open window on the screen to monitor the progress of the action and the classified results. Each category of document was in its own color, so it was easy to, first of all, acknowledge the disorganized hard disk, and afterwards, the well put together outcome. With the data given by this grammatical defragmentation, I then decide, in order to measure the fragmentation of the initial text, to put back each word of each category in its own place. The end result are the 8 black and white panels titled Partition, scores. Contrary to the effect of the cleaning software, the chaos in a text makes more sense than its defragmented state. Guided by those scores, painting, and data, I made a soundtrack of the words, each of the 8 categories on its own track. I had this utopian idea that if I play all the partitions together, I could hear the source text. It was a very demanding task for the reader, even though she was very skilled. It ended up being quite chaotic, nevertheless enchanting, if you like the sounds of words. By this exercise, I realized that the deconstruction had been canceling the text forever, and that the smoothness of the speech had been condemned to hiccup, chaos, and silence. The subject of language and knowledge resonate once more in the ensemble of 19 tableaux epigraphes from my collection of epigraphs. The paintings were hanged in relation to the large inkjet print situated in front of them titled Tableau chronologique, which places each epigraph and much more in its position relative to the author of the quote and the one using it. Not far away, in a close relationship also, they were the tableau figure titled Volume Noir, Volume Vert, and Volume Orange. Here, in order to comprehend these monochrome paintings as books and played with the multiple meanings of the word volume, the objects were made in stacks of canvas pasted together, suggesting the laminate of the cut edges, with only their left edge covered with paint. Their size and their colors were left to the viewers to figure out what kind of book they could make allusion of. I certainly can imagine new narratives, for example, between the recumbent rolled canvas, the commemorative work La Pharmacie de Platon, and the large circular gray dépôt de peinture. But of all the possible reading, I leave to the visitor the opening to find his own. I leave you with this thought. What if the dominant subject may have been simply love, as in the tableau epigraphe, signed Baudelaire, title, quote as an epigraph by, again, it's a coincidence, Jacqueline Lichtenstein. Love also, as in the Duchamp Tu aimes, which was supposed, I learned, to be completed as Tu m'emmerdes, you bore me, or something of that nature. Words addressed to painting which Duchamp disregarded by that time. Instead of that reading, I took the letter M for the French word aime, love, and that was enough to hook me to that project. I took into consideration from Duchamp artwork the color succession and the bottle cleaning giant brush planted perpendicularly to its surface, extending almost 1 meter out from the wall. Possibly a metaphorical tool serving to suggest the cleaning of the viewer eyes, and replace all this, including the veil's perspective, with a cascade of colored surfaces pushed into the real space. While including the work in the long procession of last paintings, Tu aimes un dernier tableau is a work of art that, in a way, frees the painting from the wall that goes down to meet the visitors. Undeniably, for my part, this exhibition was about the love of painting, as in Baudelaire's complete epigraphe, l'amour de la peinture jusque dans les nerfs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have about half an hour for a discussion, and if I could just respond briefly to what's been brought up, and then we'll open up for questions, or people can jump in as we go. Thinking about these three very different practices and ways of operating, I just thinking first about your process. I was imagining you as a kind of like archivist or sort of secret worker of like in the library or something, taking existing systems and reshuffling them and kind of messing them up in a way, and also inserting your own, like it seems, I'd like to know more about I'd like to know more about your, it seems like you're referencing like a whole range of source materials that are generating these paintings, including personal experiences and memories and like theoretical art historical texts, and all of these things are sort of like reshuffled through these systems that you're creating. Some of them are systems themselves that you're like reformatting, and
Do you want me to?
You're like an aggregator.
You are?
Or like the hard drive shuffler. I don't know, this is just a... So I was wondering maybe how you choose and how you move between these more personal...
I can start by saying that I'm a person of that moment in the Quebec history of painting, that I came to really try to find my way into that field quite late in life. And then I arrived at a moment where painting was not a question anymore, you know. But I had in my head that I really wanting to see if I can find a way to paint, and then going into personal things would be very difficult, and it's probably how my work looks like this. I'm sorry, I'm haunted and traumatized maybe, but no. Anyway. So I'm a person with a biography, as everybody, you know.
Yeah.
I have
we're all haunted in some ways.
I have opportunities and I have failures, and I come from a milieu, art history milieu, and a moment in the education in Quebec, and this is how I manage.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting that you are able to treat all of this range of subject matter and like connect them in your exhibitions. So it's like a bridge between things you find and things that you've experienced. So anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. You don't have to go much further, but yeah, and Christine, I feel in some ways your work is coming closest to this kind of like direct contact with the kind of social reality, or like this project that you took upon yourself in a way is quite risky. Like it was both a retreat out of the institution that was creating these, or imposing these judgments about painting, and but you're also sort of exposing yourself and making your practice and your students vulnerable to these like very, real social circumstances. And so in a way it's like a room of one's own, but it's a room of one's own like in a really risky way, you're like giving yourself more privacy and more, but you're more vulnerable at the same time. And I was thinking about the paintings that those were your paintings that you were
Actually,
showing, right?
like what happened is about this room of oneself, it's like for the young adults from l'Avenue, they were actually going to renovate the building to make it into social housing. So it was also their project, this idea of a room of one's own. But like that book was really important to me, this idea of having a private space where I could, cultivate my work, etc. But I discovered that for the young adults at l'Avenue or even the students at l'UQAM, a room of one's own is like more like their cell phone now, So even that notion of having this private space, special space to create art was not necessarily shared between the two generations. But bizarrely enough, I don't know how I'm going to make a relation with that idea, but like Isabelle Gras was talking about vitalist projections, and I don't know if there's a link with l'élan vital. Oui, yeah. Well, see, how I call it, because it's very important for me as a painter, this idea of giving body to paint, okay? And being outside, being in an unstable area, being challenged by others, being uncomfortable, creates not vitality, but creates, it gives body, gives liveliness to the work. If I'm in my studio at this point in my life, if I'm in my studio, inviting people inside, even having models coming to work for me, like it just creates dead work. So I need more and more this contact. It's not like I don't pretend I'm going to change anything about Hochelaga Maisonneuve. I wasn't like Jeanne d'Arc coming down to the east side and then wanting to, no, not at all. It wasn't that attitude at all. It was more egoist.
But I guess
than that, it was like more like this, trying to feed on real things, fear, economical challenges, and try to find a meaning for the work I'm doing, and coming from a privileged milieu, I've worked as a painter and trying to make no compromise, and I've been like recuperated by the institution, but it's like was a surprise to me. So now I'm in this other position, trying to address how I'm going to use that position to change things and to carry on with certain values I want to defend.
Because I guess what I found one of the images that was really kind of disturbing was this mattress that had red paint, I assume, kind of splattered on it. And considering that this, you said it was like a place that there was drug use and probably some kind of violence or maybe an overdose or something like that. So I felt like the project is really on this line of like how representing the space. Also, like it seemed like you were doing a kind of documentary painting, like painting the people who were inhabiting it. You were kind of archiving or
yeah, like these outsiders, because people from l'Avenue, like first of all, they're not from the art milieu. They were outsiders to society. They were like homeless people, you know? So they have this. They have a very different experience from mine, and for me, usually when I build paintings and I build discursive discourse around painting bodies of work, and I construct meaning, I play with meaning, and it's very controlled the way I work with constructing meaning around my paintings. And for me, this installation was like giving agency to the public. You know, I throwed that at them, but it was more ici, an experience here and now, you know. I didn't construct lots of things around that piece. It was just a leftover of the process. So it was very difficult to me to let go of the control of constructing a painting.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like open-ended, and then people just worked with what was going on for them in that sort of immersive painting, in a way, you know.
Yeah.
After the Cube of Matter, I was just thinking of this idea of creating a 3D painting. So there was all sorts of references, or Duchamp, étant donné, you know, there was plenty of historical layers, references and stuff, but people from L'Avenue just didn't catch that, right? It was just a gory installation piece. So it challenged my own automatisms and way that I legitimize my work. And I find it important for me to be in a situation where I put everything on the table and try to see, you know, what's going on with my practice.
Was there feedback, like, to this way of inhabiting the space?
Usually in painting exhibitions, you know, there's very little feedback. You know, when you do a show, you work hard on things. There's not like, Christine, here is what I think of your show. It's rarely like that it happens, but it does have an impact, but I never perceive the impact. So I find it normal that I didn't get any necessarily explicit feedback, so it's not abnormal for me to, but I was in a vulnerable position from my colleagues' point of view, I think.
Yeah.
So I was looking for feedback for sure. So the article I wrote really helped me to come to term with the content of the show for sure.
Right. Okay, we're going to open it up. So please, questions. Is there a microphone that could go up?
Hi, I have 2 questions for Christine. Assuming that your students maybe were, for the most part, uncomfortable coming into this space, I wonder how you saw them change and grow as artists over the course of the project. And then second question, sort of perhaps completely contradicting. I thought I saw in the artwork that a lot of it was like an echo of the atmosphere of the building, like the mattress, for example, and the blood, that sort of thing. Yeah. I wonder if any of the students proposed something that was hopeful or a vision of the future or was contrasting to the environment?
Mm-hmm. Actually, it was very difficult. We did a first project at school where we were looking at UQAM context, because in 2012 we had like a strike, right? A huge strike. We were on the street, we were outside. Students were starting to, you know, we're interested in the Situationists at UQAM. Most students are not making art objects, they're just wandering around in the city. So because of this strike, we've been used to going outside and questioning the art institution, and that's great. So I wanted to bring them outside, because they've been doing that for a few years because of the strike at UQAM. But there was resistance to go in Hochelaga Maisonneuve, you know? So it took time before I actually was able to build a project to do like a continuation of the examination of this UQAM institution, and then to go to Hochelaga Maisonneuve. It took weeks to, you know, get people going, take the metro, start to invest rooms, because there was 10 different rooms invested by the students upstairs. There were some that were abstract work, some was gory like mine, like chez Jacinthe, one of the groups. We actually separated the students between different sensibilities, because I don't have a stylistic approach. I don't impose a style in my paintings. More, you know, I generate ideas. So I was very concerned about, giving rooms that would fit the sensibility of the gory gang, the one that are more formalist. We're in a nice, pretty room. It looked like a white cube. There was people that actually did an intervention outside. They roamed the city. They wanted to walk around and stuff. It was more about the physical, like performative relationship to painting. So yes, there was very optimistic work being done. There was stuff that was more gory, influenced by teachers. They were exchanging with people from doctorates. So I wasn't the only one creating an impact or influencing their work at all. So there was all sorts of work being done, different work being done. I'm sorry, I missed the second question. Oh, I did. Yeah, there was like 10 different rooms upstairs, and bizarrely enough, it was a young man that invested the kitchen, thinking of women in the women's house. It was the kitchen in the 70s was a very important room because it was, for women, it was like the space where you work and you all the relationship to domesticity, etc. But in our case, there's a young man that decided to invest the space of the kitchen. So it created all sorts of interesting questions about domesticity, the installation of work, what it implies to install work that is more in situ, more site-specific, or more like white cube type of approach to painting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Charlene, I wanted to, hi. I noticed when you were presenting some of your images, there were images of protest. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, there were two that stood out for me. One that says something about, you were outside, says something about 1974, you're on the side of a park or something, I'm not sure what that was.
Yeah.
And there was also another protest, which I was lucky to see at the Surrey Art Gallery just recently, or it felt like a protest, but also a celebration of song and sound, using it was like a cardboard representation of like a loudspeaker, but also you had it to your eye, and you were talking about reversing the gaze or something like that. So could you talk a little bit how protest is used in your work, or just something about that?
I think that in terms of protest, it's like a way to communicate. And then it's also a way to sort of sort out hidden histories for yourself, but also a way to expose certain realities within the world and sort of global devastation and in terms of the environment. So I think with the work I was showing with the sign, it was a sign that I had painted for myself, and I was referencing a moment that happened in and around my community in terms of a group of young people getting together and protesting the taking over of a public park by the government to sort of morph it into like more crown land. And so what they were doing were they were speaking out about their social conditions and sort of like the really shitty situation of the actual town of Kenora and the reserve life. So I was thinking about that, and also having that, thinking about how that history has shaped my own life in terms of where I grew up and how I grew up, and sort of being raised outside of my community in Toronto. So that's sort of like this way of reading history and expressing it as a painting, and then taking it out into the streets of Vancouver, and sort of being like a solitary protester. So it's a way to sort of like go through something in terms of a history, and if people want to know more about what it is I'm doing, this woman walking around by herself in parks with this sign, then they can come and approach me and ask me, and I can tell this story or history of where I'm from. But I think that it's more of a performed history and a performed sort of recollection of that history. So, but it isn't fake. It's real. It's very real, and it's a way to ignite that part of that part of the country and the people and place that I'm from. So, yeah.
I have another question for Charlene. So, in your painting, maybe if my reading, first of all, I see a kind of painted textile. And so considering your works based on fields and some beadworks, I'm wondering how you relate these paintings with the textiles.
I think I was like thinking about sort of like the idea of sort of taking it to influence your composition, and then looking at old beadwork and old quill work or current quill work of now, in sort of taking inspiration through color, and then being engaged in learning that sort of process yourself, and thinking about repetition and how to bring that into a painting, and yeah, and just like feeling the same sort of sense of invigoration and acuity with your eyes and in your brain and in your heart, in terms of being engaged in that sort of cultural activity or cultural gesture. So I just like was wanting to bring those two types of activities together in that manner.
Charlene?
Go ahead.
Thank you for your work and talk, Charlene. I'd like to hear more about abstraction's power to unlock like repressed bodily sensations, not determined by instrumental logic, because you kind of touch on that when you visit the studio. And I'd like to hear more about, yeah, that's abstraction and its power.
I think maybe it's more of a translation in terms of like this thing that I'm making. It's not wanting to have a conversation with abstraction at all, and it's more about the act of painting and the act of the gesture and its reference to this activity of quilling or beading, or that it's coming from me, right? So it's more of a, I don't know if you would say it's autobiographical or whatever. It's more of a political act. So.
Yes, I have two questions to Christine. First of all, I was interested in the whole concept of escaping the economy that you proposed. You talked about an attempt to be free from exterior pressures. And it made me think of a text that the artist Merlin Carpenter published online, and it has the title, "The Outside Can't Go Outside." And what he argues in this text is that, first of all, this proposition of an outside is, needed by the hegemonic art world. This idea that there is a sphere which is not about economic concerns is crucial for a concept of art as being something that is not reducible to economics. So all these kind of non-economic, or seemingly non-economic alternative activities, actually, he argues, do relate back to the value sphere because they are desperately needed by the value sphere. This doesn't mean, of course, that there's no alternative at all. And he proposes in his text as an alternative the idea of trance, which for him is the place where the whole history of emancipatory struggles can be reactivated. But trans relates to the value sphere. It's not its absolute opposite. So I just wanted to kind of make a little advertisement for this text here. And my second question was concerning your statement that you wanted also to kind of escape, if you understood you correctly, the hegemony of language. And I was wondering how that would be possible, especially with painting. Because for me, I consider painting from a semiotic perspective as a language. As a language that doesn't produce obvious meanings very often, as a language of a specific kind, but it is, I think, it has to be regarded as a language full of signs, signs that have a very particular indexicality, that mean in a way that is different from spoken language, but nevertheless, I wonder if this escaping from language can be an option, especially once we deal with painting.
But it is filtered by different actors, right? Around there is language being produced about work by art historians, or we do depend on critics, or critical reception is very important to the value of the work we do. So there is this filter of language that is not only produced by the work, but also this dance, this play with all the actors that are generating language around the work. But I don't know, I do feel that just because of the structure, for example, to get legitimacy for the work, the language comes sometimes before even the work is actually produced. So there is like this, for me anyway, there's this necessity to generate words, and my concern is that it's less efficient to produce work. There must be there's a longer delay when you produce work, and it's quicker because I have colleagues that are producing text, right, as a production. So for me, I kind of see that as more efficient in this type of economy, but it's maybe my naive point of view. But I don't know what to say about the outside and this dialectic between inside and outside. The student I'm working with at the doctorate level is interested in this idea of marginality, being in the margin, and we've been even reading Derrida and trying to understand what, the supplément and what's around, how meaning is constructed autour de la peinture. But for me, it's like, I don't believe in this, binary inside, outside. So I don't know. We've been thinking about this dialectic between inside and outside. This, again, binary system of thinking very schematically that there's in the outside and this inside. It's it doesn't work. But all those subtleties are more like present in the text I wrote in French, but I would have a difficult time trying to go into details right now because of my English. But we've been thinking about this idea of like this dialectic between inside and outside, and not simplifying, thinking the margin is great, and then there's the opposite that is this hegemonic position. But I thank you for the reference to Carpenter. Thank you very much for your question also.
Okay, we are out of time. Thank you everybody for your questions, and thank you Christine, Charlene, and Francine for your wonderful presentations.